I hope I've been fairly diligently following the advice from you over the last 5 years, Ash. So given that, how long do you think I've got?
Yeah. Well, I mean, judging by what's going on in recent research, if we could continue to feed your cell effectively, and now through peptides feed the DNA properly, data suggests that you will be living till 120.
You could be my best friend.
And living well. Or dying younger
Right.
later.
Yes, definitely. Welcome to This Is You. I'm Brone Edwards, and here we try and unravel the very secrets of life itself. In this episode, I welcome Dr. Ash Kapoor. Ash is a fully qualified general practitioner. He's a GP trainer. He is accredited in minor surgery. Ash is also director of a primary care unit. He looks after a cottage hospital. And most importantly for this episode, Ash is accredited in anti-aging and longevity. So Ash, Brian May wrote a very famous song sung by Freddie Mercury and Queen, Who Wants to Live Forever? And I think the answer to that question for most people would be yes, sure.
Yeah.
The only problem is we're all getting older. So aging, gets in the way. So I guess before you can answer the question, would I like to live forever? You have to ask the question, what is getting old?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely right. I think the key thing here is, the question you're asking is, what is aging? In our minds, often it has negative connotations. The brain not working so well, memory problems, joints hurting, and decline effectively. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what exactly is going on to cause that to happen? And if we understand what's going on to cause that to happen, maybe we'll have a solution to it. Essentially, we are made of little tiny cells, trillions of cells. These cells come together and form tissues. Those tissues come together and form organs. So logically speaking, if we look after the cell, surely the tissue and organ would look after itself. So effectively, the secret to avoiding aging is look and see what's going on at a cellular level. Look after the cell, feed the cell, protect the cell, and that cell will technically not age. More importantly, what makes that cell? We all know about DNA. We've heard about DNA. This is the thread that creates cells. So looking one step even beyond that cell, look after your DNA, and the regenerative processes of that cell will continue. And therefore, we could stave off those issues linked to aging, and therefore not only increase longevity, but those elements of longevity where your brain is working, your body's working, will be sustained.
Okay, so when I was young, I was told by somebody, I think in the medical profession, that everything's fine until you get to the age of 26. Because everything up until then is growing, sort of desperate to be what it wants to be. After 26, it's all downhill. Everything starts to actually die. You don't realize it because you're still young and strong, but actually what's happening is you're beginning to die. From what you've said, that's either not true or not necessary.
Yes, I think both. It's not true and not necessary. We are born with little tiny cells. They're a bit like children at nursery. They haven't quite gone into a profession. So they're called stem cells. And we're born with X amount of stem cells that can become whatever the brain wants it to be. We know that stem cells reduce as we get older, but we also know that we can do things to ourselves to accelerate that process or decelerate that process. So one of the hallmarks of aging is a reduction of stem cells. This is only one of several hallmarks of aging. So the reality is, if we can increase, not increase or reduce the deceleration of stem cells, things will not have to decline. Similarly, if we look after our DNA, we look after the protective mechanisms of our body, the process of decline can be stopped or reduced. So much so that we're now looking at studies that show that you can live up to the age of 120 if you look after the DNA and the cells.
So, okay, so that's just to go back a second in what you said. So you've raised something there I've not heard before, which is that stem cell, we can arrest the deceleration of stem cells. Is that what you say?
So stem cells have to become something. If an organ, for example, if your liver is being overutilized, in other words, you're putting in toxins in your body or doing things, taking certain medications where the liver cells are dying, those stem cells have to act in an increased fashion to rebuild what's dying. So by definition, you'll be utilizing those cells in an increased way. So if you're born with X numbers, that utilization will mean that there'll be less longevity for that particular organ. If you look after your liver, the cellular decline will reduce, and therefore those stem cells will be available much longer.
And does that apply to most or all of our organs?
Absolutely every single organ.
So in other words, stem cells, which I don't particularly understand them, but I've heard about them, I've read about them a bit, so I'm sort of familiar. They can have a much longer useful life in supporting, regenerating the parts of our body,
yes,
which we need to be healthy if we're going to address this issue of I'm getting old.
Exactly. So it's like anything. If you, like a car, for example, if you use a car a lot, the tires are going to wear out. You're going to have to replace them more frequently. If the car is used less, used more efficiently, the tires will not have to be replaced so often, and therefore the longevity of that particular tire will go on a bit longer. So it's a bit of a balance. We like you say, up to 26 we're quite resilient, but that's because our stem cell activity is high, our ability to regenerate is more efficient because there's abundance. But if we overdo that abundance will reduce, and therefore cellular decline and therefore aging will come in earlier.
So I think in a minute it'd be really good to understand as much as we can about what actually goes wrong, because no doubt you're going to start to tell us, therefore, what we can actually do about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So can you give us a couple of examples of what happens in a cell that makes it age or start to, malfunction or, wear out in a way that maybe it shouldn't if we looked after ourselves differently?
Exactly. So there's a few things to talk about there. In big principles, the first thing is the toxic strain on a cell. In other words, the cell has to combat certain toxins, certain negative environments on a regular basis. The more strain you put on that cell with these toxins, the more likely it is going to be damaged, and therefore there's more likelihood of it needing to be replaced. If this is happening on a consistent level, we see something called telomere attrition. So your DNA can make cells at a great pace. And if you're pushing it to make cells at an even higher pace, there's more risk of something going wrong. And therefore, cellular decline can be due to the DNA mutating or going wrong, which can lead to disease, things like cancer, or cellular decline. So that's one thing, the environment that cell's working in. Toxins can be heavy metals, they can be things you put in your mouth, they could be poor nutrition. All of these things can add to the toxic environment around a cell or around the DNA, which can cause problems. So one of the things we must look at is, what are these toxins? How can we mitigate against those risks? The second thing is, cells need food. We all need food. Now, sadly, with the processing, the freezing, the heating, food is no longer quite the nutrition we expect it to be. So if we cannot feed these cells or feed the DNA correctly, it's not going to have the nourishment to work efficiently, and therefore cellular decline can occur. So the second thing we must look at is, what do we do? What is the food that these cells need? The third thing is, everything needs energy. In your body, you've got a little dynamo, a little battery. It's called a mitochondria. And this dynamo produces the energy that makes the whole system work. And the actual energy is called ATP. It is the only currency of energy that your body needs. Now, again, this battery, if it is overutilized, it's going to run out of steam. It's like anything. You put a battery in something, you use it more, you're going to have to replace it. So we have to think about what makes this battery work most efficiently. So again, that is another way of managing the aging process. Keep the battery strong. you'll get the energy to regenerate and renew.
Mm.
So again, we have things that we can combat both naturally and using innovative medicine to support that.
Mm.
The fourth thing is we mustn't forget your immune system. You're built with the most sophisticated defense system ever, starting with your gut. Your gut is your first port of call for the immune system. You have things going on in your gut that stop bad things coming in, allow good things to come in. Now, with the nutritional status currently, we're putting things in our stomach which the gut really doesn't like. It's a big ecosystem, your gut. It's a forest of hundreds of millions of bacteria. And if we feed one more than the other, we can get overgrowth of these bacteria, and that can affect the ecosystem. And by definition, then, the efficiency of your gut. So you'll have heard of things like leaky gut syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, inflammation. All of these things show strain in the gut. So if your first defense is vulnerable, then of course the rest of the body is going to be vulnerable. You then have a second defense system called the liver. The liver is a very sophisticated defense system. That's the first sense check of things that have gone through the gut. Now, if the gut's not doing its job properly, the poor liver's going to have to pick up the pieces. So we're overloading a system, meaning it's going to have to work harder, possibly less efficiently, and even some of these toxins can be damaging to the liver. So again, we have to understand what is good for us, what is not good for us, in order for these defense systems to keep functioning. So we've talked a bit about the dynamo, we've talked about this feeding the cell, we've talked about protecting the immune system. The fourth thing we need to think about is stress generally. Our brain is the conductor to everything. We have a very sophisticated machine which will sense problems and put the body into a position to deal with those problems. Now, our cells evolutionarily are still caveman cells. Evolution of your cells to the environment takes hundreds of thousands of years. Look at the Ice Age, the Stone Age. Our current modern environment's only a few hundred years old. Our cells are still caveman cells. So what they're used to is physical stresses, because our predecessors were used to physical problems. Need for food, need for water, need for shelter, protecting themselves against that saber-toothed tiger. Those were all physical stresses. So the brain is adapting to be able to function against those physical stresses. So what happened to your predecessors when a saber-toothed tiger was about to run after them? Their adrenal gland, which is your gland that produces cortisol, the fight or flight hormone, will be put into action. This will surge steroid into your body, bring sugar into the system, create something called adrenaline so your heart can work quicker, so you can run away. Now, that same problem could be a difficult email. But the body will still behave in that physical way. Surge of cortisol, adrenaline, you get anxious, but you're not running anywhere. You've been prepared to run, but you're not going anywhere. So of course, this produces something called inflammation. It then leads to maladaptive behavior in the cells because they cannot understand what's going on. Now, it's fine if this happens once in a while, but if it happens every single day, we'll be internally depleting our system. And if you think on top of that, we're not feeding the system correctly, we're damaging the defense system. All of these things can accelerate cellular decline, which then leads to disease and disorder. The other big problem and challenge we've got is being very good at bundling together what I call signals, but others would call symptoms. So we bundle together palpitations, anxiety, poor sleep, and call it depression. And then, of course, when we call it a disease, there's often a tablet for this disease. What we must get better at doing is understanding the root cause analysis and understand why the body's doing what it's doing. The body's not incorrect in what it's doing, but the stimulus is something that we need to be addressing. And the problem is, we now know that inflammation is the root cause analysis of almost every modern day disease. So we've kind of got used to having quick fixes, but we should be digging deep and thinking, what's going wrong with myself for me to be behaving in this way and addressing that?
Yeah, amazing. This is like a menu for life.
Yes.
And a couple of things I understand, kind of. A couple of things I think it'd be good to just drill into a bit more. And then, if I may, it'd be good to go back over them and say, okay, so what do we actually do about it? And I think some of them are going to reveal, fascinating things. So we'll go back to the beginning in a minute, but starting at the end, this idea of bundling, which I'm familiar with because I'm a patient. I go and see my GP, who's got 10 minutes to work out what's going on and then generally prescribe me some medicine of some description, when actually what might be going on is something related to the bundled symptom that the GP is facing, but actually is not going to get addressed by the treatment for that bundle. On my way back from the clinic today, I hit a portion of the road where we go from 70 miles an hour to 50. The road hasn't changed, and it's actually quite frustrating. But I've decided that I will generally stick to the speed limit. So I put my cruise control down to about 52 miles an hour. Coming up behind me was a black car, and it was only 2 lanes. I wasn't budging because I had cars on my inside which I couldn't get in, otherwise I caused a crash. And anyway, I was doing 2 miles an hour more than the speed limit. So I had nowhere to go and I wasn't budging. I did start to feel a bit angry. He got closer and closer and closer. Then he started to flash his lights, and then his horn was going. Now, I experienced what you described with the email. Everything in my body fired up. My heart raced. I felt slightly angry. I felt stressed because I had no idea what this guy was going to do next. I did pull in, then he pulled down alongside me and started shouting expletives through an open window. That in the old days, the very old days, would have been your saber-toothed tiger, which you probably didn't see that often.
Yeah.
So when he did see it, once every couple of days, you were very grateful for the system. I could quite easily face what I faced, with a bad email and a bit of anger at work, or a frustration for this, or can't get a GP appointment or whatever. I could face that multiple times in my life, but with nothing, nowhere for it to go.
Yes.
Exactly. My car situation, I just had to suffer it.
Yeah.
And it took me probably half an hour to calm down.
Yeah.
Now this happened a couple of hours ago today.
Yes. And that's an interesting analogy, Bernard. But what I would ask you is, if you were surrounded by similar people to yourself all day, every day, doing the same thing, that would become your new norm.
Yeah.
And you would no longer recognize this as a problem and part and parcel of life. So we have people going into jobs, into stressful scenarios, seeing their colleagues doing exactly the same thing and thinking that is now normal. That is not normal. Yeah. Our caveman cells are used to short, sharp stresses for short periods of time and then calming down. The modern world is now geared to revving us up right from childhood onwards. There's, you've got to pass this exam, and you've got to be able to do this, and then you've got to do all these extracurricular activities, and you've got to aspire to a better school and then a better job. So what we're doing is we've created mini saber-toothed tigers from a very early age. Now, the thing about the brain is efficient. One would even call it lazy. If it sees this as happening every day, it'll keep the accelerator on. And often, years later, people don't quite know what the initial trigger was because they just become wired. This is well documented in papers. It's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, where the brain has commanded the cortisol to keep going. Now, of course, it will keep going because it's fight or flight. But at some point, it gets tired, and the adrenal gland says to the brain, hey, I'm exhausted. I can't keep doing this. He's not stopping. And the brain will say, tough. You're the only one that matters because you're the only one that's keeping this organ alive. So find something else as a form of energy. So we often find in chronic scenarios like you've described, if they're going on, the brain commands the adrenal gland to find its energy from somewhere else if it's depleting. And it usually goes to second batteries like your hormones. So we find that your hormones that are supposed to be there for your well-being will be diverted to help form cortisol, particularly things like testosterone and DHEA in men, and testosterone, DHEA, and progesterone in women. And these hormones, by depleting, then give you a sense of fatigue. So you go from a wired stage to a wired, tired stage, and that also is well documented. And then if that goes on for periods of time, The hormones get tired, but the brain will not allow cortisol to fail. If your car ran out of petrol, it would stop. Your body hasn't got that privilege. So it will then find other forms of energy, usually the autonomic nervous system. And once the body's flat, or these buckets of energy are depleted, we get what we call illnesses, whether it's autoimmune diseases, inflammation. All of these things stem from a period where the cells have started to go into decline years before. And we need to be better as a profession to recognize that root cause. Often it's quite deep down. It could have happened a long time ago. But if we can reverse that and essentially put the adrenal gland at rest, restore immunity and restore the hormones and restore the mitochondrial battery, why would we get ill?
Yeah. So I don't want to sort of discuss it in the extreme, but it feels a bit like better to be educated than medicated.
I think that's an excellent way of putting it. Excellent way of putting it. It's difficult because even in the medical profession, we spend the first 2 years understanding the physiology of how the body works. But then we're put in a position where the majority of our training does move towards pharmacological and diagnostic investigations. And the higher we get in medicines, the more we know about the diagnostics and investigations. So I guess the key thing here is we perhaps need to rethink about how we manage things. So in a 10-minute consultation, yes, we've been taught to give preventative advice. We've been taught to tell people to eat properly, exercise, etc. But in the 10-minute consultation, it's almost lip service, to be honest with you, which is why it often fails. The majority of the consultation is the referral or the prescription or the testing of the drugs or doing laboratory testing. So very little is given to what's happened and when it's happened.
And as the patient, it's very hard to take away in a couple of minutes that advice, because the pill you can take, because we're used to doing that, you might be talking about something that's a change of lifestyle. Well, that's pretty tough.
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't it?
And in order to change people's lifestyles, you need to dissect how they start their day and how they finish their day and whatever happens in between. And also look at steps in their life where things may have gone into transition. And once my experience is that if you have enough time with a patient and you explain to them, this is why you're getting this symptom and this is what's happening in the physiology, 95% of patients say to me, I get that. I understand that. And I just feel that we have this innate intuition about what's right and what's wrong. But unfortunately, we've gone to the expert model where we've put all our trust into experts and are not listening to ourselves. And I think if we can bring more of that back, and it was that intuition that kept your predecessors alive, which is why you're here. So I think we need to perhaps rethink about how we manage symptoms and perhaps call them signals with a view to looking at alternative ways of looking at it.
So signals, not symptoms.
Yeah.
That is a great phrase. So in a sort of basic sense then, we've got all this stuff going on in this massive, complex, multi-layered factory production machine. And it's good at doing this. When that starts to malfunction or wear out, the boss says, okay, guys, you now come in. Yeah, well, okay, that's not working. So before you know it, your whole system is reacting to this first thing that took place.
Correct.
And all we know is, I feel a bit tired. I've lost my energy at 6 o'clock. I want to slump down in front of the TV and fall asleep. So what do? Well, I might take a pick-me-up or something. I don't know. But we're actually not fixing the root cause.
Yes,
issues.
exactly. And we're not optimizing ourselves. That's the other thing. We're talking a little bit about disease and illness and signals, but actually we should be really saying, am I the best version of myself today? Is my brain working at the best level? Is my physiology working at the best level? So human optimization ultimately is about looking and addressing the cellular function. So we mustn't be just satisfied about not having a signal. We must be looking at ourselves internally saying, am I the best form of myself? Now, of course, that's difficult because your only comparison is your previous self. But I do believe that most of us are quite suboptimal. Things are just working below par, and we've accepted it. And also we put it down to life events or being busy or doing too much. But really, when we reflect, and if you look at some of the patients who've gone through a human optimization program, they just cannot believe the bandwidth they get in their brains, their ability to function, their ability to manage stress. They become responders, not reactors. They respond to triggers rather than react to them. And it's very fulfilling. And most importantly, it is intuitively something that patients understand, and they own it. They don't need to see doctors for pills. They own this, they understand what's happening, and they address it quickly.
Well, I can tell you, I've known you, I'm guessing 5 years, I don't know.
Yes.
Prior to that time, my evening was, I got more tired. My energy sort of lapsed a bit, and eventually, obviously, I go to bed. I might fall asleep in the chair and go to sleep. Now, I like to think I've done my best to follow some of the advice and support you give me. Now I'm not tired in the evenings. I've got energy to do things, and my brain is alert. I go to sleep when my head hits the pillow. Maybe I read for a bit, but I struggle to read because the moment I start reading, I'm off, and I wake up with a book on my chest or something. So, personally, it feels to me like there's a lot in this, and I sort of wish that the information, the stimulus for us to do something about it, was more readily available. Yes. And we'll come back to this, but it seems the system, maybe not intentionally, is working against us. Yes. Because it cannot change. Yes. It's stuck. Yes. in a mode of operation. It's geared up. Everything in the entire process of processes is geared up to operate in the way it is doing. So yes. It's probably quite tough to.
It is tough, and you've got to remember, modernization has brought abundance to all of us. We can almost get everything we want within 15 minutes. You can call for any cuisine in the world and it'll be with you very shortly. We live in a very comfortable environment. We have access to everything. But remember, our cells are caveman cells. We're actually built for scarcity, not for abundance. And as we get more and more urbanized in the modern way, we're distancing ourselves away from what our cells need. And that gap, that disparity, is where these inflammatory disorders arise from. So it is difficult because we need to almost change the mindset. We also need to understand that we can cure ourselves of many of these signals. And the environment has to change. The mindset has to change, and we must have confidence in our intuition. And I'm beginning to see more and more people reflecting on this. They're beginning to see that they want to have solutions for themselves. They're willing to look at how they're eating, how they're living, how they're sleeping, and actually making the relationships between what's going on in their outside world and those signals. So I'm beginning to feel that this is something that is increasing, albeit in pockets.
So I'm going to just revisit the line you've just said because it struck me really strongly. Yeah. And I wrote it down. We can cure ourselves.
Absolutely.
That's quite amazing.
Yeah.
And so if I'm 26 and I've reached this age when I was told everything's going downhill, no doubt we could, at that age or any age, we can understand all this stuff, which we are going to come back to, and we can start to do it right.
Yes.
That makes sense, and you'll give yourself a much better shot at a long, healthy life. What about when you're 60, 70, 75? Is it too late?
No, absolutely not. There is absolutely... The beauty of our immune system, unlike a car, the car can't regenerate a new tire. It has to replace it. Our cells are capable of regenerating, given the right environment. Now, the body is very complex. The physiology is super complex, and it's adapting each time. But fundamentally, there are 3 or 4 principles that we apply to almost every patient, irrelevant of their age. And the emphasis on each of these principles is determined by which is the bigger factor, which we can measure. But we apply a very simple principle of detoxification, repair, and renewal. Those are the 3 big things. What do I mean by detoxification? Well, effectively, our bodies, as I mentioned earlier, are built for scarcity. So we are prepared for starvation, for being in the cold, being in the heat for short periods of time. It's called hormetic stress. Now, in our bodies, we've almost got 3 larders, I call them, 3 fridges, big deep fridges and larders. The first one is sugar. And we store sugar in the form of glycogen. They're like little Mars bars stored to be utilized when you need them. And because the brain's efficient or lazy, it likes that because it's quick energy. So we have this big larder of glycogen, and then there's a second larder which very few people are aware of. It's called protein debris. As we're speaking now, 100,000 skin cells have just regenerated on your body. The old skin cells haven't all gone. They are bits of protein, and we call it debris, that have gone and found storage spaces in all your cells. And that's not an accident. That's the body from your primordial instinct saying, one day you're not going to eat and you're going to need protein. So these little life packs we're going to keep stored there.
So they've been displaced or sort of discarded,
yes.
But actually they're quite useful?
Yes,
okay.
Correct. Now
scraps or something?
Scraps, yeah.
Scraps.
Yeah. So these are dead and dying DNA repair stuff, but it's protein. And this is now being stored in your second larder. And then you have a third larder called fat. Now, the fat is the bit that everyone's interested in losing weight, etc. But in order of preference, the body will always go towards the sugar larder. Now, a lot of people...
Because we all fancy a Mars bar.
We all fancy a Mars bar or carbohydrate, a croissant, chocolate, biscuits, all of the carbs. But it's not just about what we put in our mouth. We talked about stress. We talked about the adrenal gland. You can make sugar within you in the right environment. So if you're constantly stressed, your cortisol levels will demand the making of sugar. Now, of course, that sugar you're not always utilizing. So it will go into the glycogen storage and some of it will go into the fat larder. So these guys who are stressed are constantly building this larder up, and the other larders are just left redundant. Now, what I mean by detoxification, and this is the interesting, Professor Usimi, who won the Nobel Prize in 2016, discovered that if we emptied this protein debris out, in other words, we got the body to biohack this debris and remove it, the body works quicker, more efficiently, it metabolizes better, you get more mitochondrial energy, and effectively your capability to regenerate increases to such a level that you can anti-age, you can reduce the acceleration of aging and even reverse it. So how do you get to this larder? Well, you've got this big fridge full of sugar first, and you're not going to be able to get to the second larder until you empty the sugar out. So we do various versions of fasting. Now, intermittent fasting has been very popular, but ultimately the bottom line is to get to the other larders, you've got to empty the sugar out. Once you empty the sugar out, you're effectively taking a whole load of ammunition out of your system. So when the cortisol comes up under stress, it doesn't have all this ammunition to work with anymore. Your pancreas stops making as much insulin. So your inflammatory markers just drop. And in our data...
What's an inflammatory marker?
So effectively, inflammation is it's a form of heat that's produced in the body that can impact on every cell. And with that, it creates dysfunction in the cell. So inflammatory markers are found to reduce when you have less sugar in the system.
So it's a good indicator.
Good indicator, yeah.
Right.
And so emptying this larder out, we do aggressive fasting, medically supervised, and it doesn't take long. 2 or 3 days, you can empty that sugar larder out. If you've got more Mars bars than your colleagues, it may take another day or two. But ultimately, that sugar is removed. People worry, oh my gosh, I'm going to have problems with energy. I won't be able to survive. The reality is these are storage tanks. They're a bit like your fridge. The problem is we keep filling the front of the fridge and never looking at the back of the fridge. And you wouldn't do that with your own fridge. So emptying the first larder out then pushes the body and forces it to go towards that protein debris. So your brain will command the body, go and find protein. And it empties out from the brain, the heart, the gastric system. Everywhere there's debris will be taken out, recycled to brand new DNA. So you're effectively lifting away all the rubbish in your body that's slowing your body down. Most of our patients who've done this, and there's been a few hundred now, said that they sleep better, they feel alert, they feel less stressed, they just feel a calmness which they could never describe before. Once that debris is over and the sugar's reduced, there's only one place to go. That's the fat larder. So the body starts biohacking its internal fat. And we can measure this by measuring the ketones in your body. So when you metabolize fat, you release ketones, and we can measure this. Now, your brain is fat. So when you start biohacking fat, your brain gets fed first. And when your brain's fed first, you get satiety. So it regulates your hunger, your craving, and everything. Now, once people have got into that lane, they don't crave anymore. They don't comfort eat anymore. They feel an energy which they love. They sleep well. And so essentially that detoxification is a way of getting rid of all the rubbish in your system. And we always insist on doing some form of detox before we go into the repair mode.
And the detox, we'll come back to this great list, this menu of yours. The detox is triggered by a fast.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
And what you're effectively doing, whether it's a short fast or a long one, and the longer one, the couple of days or whatever you said would be more effective. But effectively, that one thing then triggers off all these other functions, which your body knows. It actually knows how to do it.
Absolutely. It's in fact, not only does it know how to do it, it is what it's built for.
Right.
So having done this, now remember, your predecessors didn't have a choice. There would be days, 2-3 days, where they wouldn't have food. So, and they've survived for hundreds of thousands of years. So we are built for this. But what we've done is fill these larders up and have increased these inflammatory processes that lead to disease disorders and these abnormal signals. Once you start biohacking the fat, not only will you lose weight and feel better, the energy that your body gets used to being in that lane. And when you do eat something bad or something that's not so good for you, your body protests quicker. You'll feel bloated, you'll feel windy, you won't sleep well at night. And it's almost like you'll basically train the body to be on your side, which is why healthy people stay healthier. Because when they don't eat something that is good for them, the body protests. When you're ill, those radars are subdued. And so it's a way of sensitizing your body. That's not the only detox. The second detox, which is something we don't realize, is living in an urban life. We're constantly inhaling heavy metals, things like aluminium, lead, and in the past mercury. These heavy metals have half-lives of up to 30 years. In other words, 50% will leave after 30 years. And these slow down your processes. So not only do we detox in terms of getting rid of the inflammatory markers, we like to help people detox from these heavy metals and toxins.
And how do we do that?
Well, there's natural nutrients like chlorella or spirulina. And in the more excessive cases, there are some EDTA drips that can sponge out these heavy metals in a supervised way.
And can we avoid them by not eating things or not exposing it? I mean,
you can try and mitigate your risk, but the point about living in cities, it's all around us. So hence what we have to do is accept what is around us and try and mitigate against the risk. Ideally, we should be living in a nice open environment with the sea or the jungle, fresh air, but we have to be realistic and once we understand what's going on, we can start to mitigate against risks.
See, what's interesting about this conversation is we've touched on a few things so far that I can actually do, and we're going to get a lot more. But the very process of hearing you talk about this sometimes quite technical set of interrelated subjects, for me, makes me want to be curious about what I can do about it.
Yes.
I find listening to you speak, it wakes me up. It wakes up my hunger for knowledge because I feel like I can actually do something about it by listening to what you're saying.
And
I haven't, the key. I haven't got to the point of saying, okay, here's the 5 things I can do yet. But actually, before that's happened, I feel like I want to know. That's going to make me curious and go and read and listen in a way that I wasn't before.
And you own it. And I think this is the thing. We are humans. We're built to survive. Our intuition tells us what is right and what is wrong. We just need to empower ourselves a little bit, have the confidence. And it's very difficult because we have a lot of experts around us telling us about the right pathway. Fundamentally, like you said, short or long fast, as long as people understand what they're doing, they can bespoke it to their lifestyles. The endpoint will be reached at different variation times, and depending on how much emphasis the detox has, will determine what you do. The reparative stage is very interesting. Now, the reparative stage, is about feeding that dynamo, the battery, the mitochondria. There are certain nutrients which will help support the battery feed it. Now, of course, if your battery's got full energy, you'll be able to do more. Your cells will be able to regenerate. You'll have more cellular function. You'll feel good, and it's self-fulfilling. The better you feel, the more you do, and you more or less the body looks after itself. So there's ways of improving mitochondrial activity. There's sophisticated drips as well as nutritional supplements. And the other thing we mustn't forget is hormones. Now, hormones have always been associated with menopause or andropause. Hormonal decline in an average person starts at the age of 30. We drop our hormones maybe by 1% per year. Now, the hormones are the highways. They're the highways along which everything travels. So when your hormones decline, it's like having potholes on the road. Things just don't work or fire as well. And 50, 60 years ago, we just accepted that this is aging. But the reality is, if we kept those highways open, why would we age? If we keep the cargo, the nutrition good, and the highways moving and protect against the toxins that I've described, why can't those cells carry on? And ultimately, evidence has shown that that is the case. So part of our repair is looking at hormonal restoration, mitochondrial restoration, and then things like sleep. We mustn't underestimate the power of sleep. It is when the body shuts down and goes into a reparative stage. And unfortunately, this cortisol gland, which is pumping out cortisol, should go to sleep by about 9 p.m. But sadly, because the world we live in, the artificial lights, the stresses, that cortisol sometimes wakes up at the wrong time. And then the melatonin hormone, which is anti-inflammatory and helps you sleep, doesn't come out to play because the mammoth of cortisol.
So melatonin, which I think most of us will have heard, or maybe not fully understood, melatonin is produced through the good process that you've described, which we often miss because the other bad one that's happening to us. This will help deal with inflammation.
100%.
Wow.
What is interesting is that there's a gland called the pineal gland in your brain.
Yeah.
And the pineal gland is the one gland that is associated with longevity.
Yeah.
And what does the pineal gland make? Melatonin. It produces melatonin in the day with a view to releasing at night.
So I don't want to simplify it to the ridiculous, but if people like me are going to actually do something about it, then it probably needs to be pretty basic. So if you sort of reduce all that down to one thing, however we achieve good sleep will release into our system the melatonin that's been produced during the day.
Correct.
And that melatonin during the night will deal with the inflammation.
Absolutely.
And we know, and you said it, inflammation is a big killer, and it's a big cause of aging.
Yes, and melatonin is just one hormone that's produced by good sleep.
Okay.
The other one is growth hormone.
So melatonin is a hormone.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes, and it's made through darkness and sleep. There's a study done by a chap called Bill Lawrence in the US. You talk about, is there a different plan for young people versus older people? Not really. So Bill Lawrence, he's into peptides. Peptides are basically protein amino acids in different sequences that feed different parts of the body. So he did a study on 60-year-olds, and he gave one group the task of eating healthily and exercising, and he gave the second group eating healthy, exercising, and taking this peptide for the pineal gland and another gland called the thymus gland that protects your immune system. And basically, these were just oral supplements twice a year, and he followed them through for 15 years, and he measured their biological age. And how did he do that? He looked at telomere length. This is like the protective element of a DNA. And the longer your telomere, the more your DNA is protected. The shorter your telomere, the less it's protected, and you can age. So he measured telomeres. He then looked at what they call CD57 counts, which is your immune system. And he looked at something called DNA methylation, which is the toxicity around your DNA. And he did this yearly up until the age of 75. And when he looked at biological age in those who took the peptides, i.e. the pineal gland, which produces melatonin, this group on average was about 25% younger at the age of 75 than the group who didn't take peptides, which shows you the benefit of something like melatonin as a hormone and feeding that particular gland. Well,
I'll tell you something really funny, which I don't think I've mentioned to you yet. I go to a small island called Sifnos in Greece, and I was there a couple of months ago. I'd not been for a long time, and I walked down to a restaurant to book an evening meal. I hadn't been to that restaurant even longer, maybe up to 10 years. I got the restaurant. The same guy was there. We do what you do. We shook hands, said hello, said we're going to eat here tonight. It'd be lovely. And he said, what's going on? I said, this is absolutely true. I said, what do you mean what's going on? He said, you were here 10 years ago. So now you should be 10 years older. You're actually 10 years younger.
Yeah.
I want to know what's happening.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he said to me.
Yes. Well, there you are.
So something happens.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you mind if we go back to the beginning of your menu?
Yes.
And we'll see how much time we can devote to just summarize what this is and therefore some things that we can actually do about it.
Yes.
The list I've got, and then I'll go back to the beginning. We had toxins and the damage they do. Number 2 was cells that need food. We've got the mitochondria, the cells, the battery, energy, and we've just touched on some things you can do. No doubt you'll tell us there's more very practical things. But, we all know what sleep is. Now we know what happens when we sleep and how critical it is to our health. Then we had the immune system, and we talked about gut and inflammation. And then we talked about stress and this issue of having caveman brains, but living in a modern society for which we haven't yet had half a chance to actually get used to it.
Correct.
So we're filling our body with stress, and it's got absolutely nowhere to go.
Yes.
Because there is no saber-toothed tiger to run from or kill. No. And something you said earlier as well is something about the brain. Oh, we are a slave to our brain.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's number 5. And number 6, which I think number 6 was the bundling issue, which may be slightly separate. So let's try and get one bit of advice for each of these if we can. So toxins, we take them into our body, they do damage.
Correct.
How can we, apart from the detox process you've been through, which I think is amazing and so ludicrously simple, doesn't mean taking 5 different pills, which is when you get older, what tends to happen. How can we either deal with the toxins we take in or take in less?
Yeah.
Toxins?
So quite simply, I think the key, if we're going to take 1 or 2 interventions to detoxify, it would be to reduce the amount of carbohydrate that we take in. Not easy because, bread, rice, potato, every culture has it. But if we can try and remove as much carbohydrate from our diet as we can, that would be a big step, because over time that glycogen will remove and the inflammation will follow. Now, linked to that, we know that we can probably survive quite well with 2 meals a day instead of 3. So again, getting into a mindset of eating twice is important. Some things we need to remember, that our body cannot differentiate the need for food, water, or minerals. So when we have those cravings for food, what I suggest is sometimes have a pint of water 30 minutes at that time, or 30 minutes before a meal, and you'll find that your body didn't actually need the food. It just needed water and minerals. So simple things like that. Reduce the carb, go towards a 2 meal a day diet, and look at taking water in when you feel that hunger pang. That would be a good detox. In terms of heavy metal, all the testing we've done is majority of people have aluminium, lead and mercury to some extent in their system. So simple nutrients like chlorella or spirulina, which are available in good health food shops, will help mitigate the risk against the heavy metals. Some people can suffer quite a lot with mercury poison. They can feel depleted. It's almost misdiagnosed with myalgia or post-viral fatigue. So again, just manage the detox. And you can't change where we live, but we can mitigate against those risks. Those would be the fundamental principles that I would apply. And most importantly, try and eat whole food. Processed food is sometimes lacks the nutrition we require. So we're well fed but undernourished. And I think try and aim to eat less but better.
Yeah, I suppose junk food processed food slips into junk food quite easily, doesn't it, really?
Yes.
And what do you say? You're saying that is, apart from the poor carbohydrates, it's full of all sorts of other stuff which our body doesn't really
Yes, and
need.
it's been preserved, it's been manipulated, and it's made for bulk. And we have to remember that, if you're able to get a fruit 12 months of the year when it's a seasonal fruit, you've got to ask what's happened to that fruit to make it available out of season.
Yeah.
And again, we're feeding our stomachs, but not our cells.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So that was number one, toxins. Number two was cells, and the cells need food. In a way, we've covered that from what you said.
Yeah.
Okay, well, sometimes it's tough to get off processed junk food.
Yeah.
In fact, it's difficult.
And I would say it is difficult, which is why supplementation is now essential, just because, again, we have to accept the environment we've created. So if we're looking at the top 3 or 4 supplements, I would say vitamin D hormone. And by the way, vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. The difference is you can make hormones, you can't make vitamins, and you can make vitamin D. A lot of studies pre and post COVID have shown how powerful it is across literally every organ, and it's an immune regulator. So vitamin D, also cellular food and immune food are things like zinc and copper, magnesium, vitamin C. If we can supplement along those lines, that would be very good.
Well, these things are readily available, and they're cheap.
They are.
Actually.
Yes.
A lot cheaper than a double pizza helping.
And remember, if we remove the furnace in our body, I call it inflammation, these micronutrients will not be depleted in the wrong way.
Yeah.
So by reducing inflammation, you're enabling more of these nutrients to be there for your well-being.
So it's having a double effect.
Absolutely.
You're minimizing the damage that's done from inflammation, and you're removing the kill effect it has on some of the other things, which, if they're left alone to flourish, will do you more good.
Yes. And thirdly, the gut itself should be allowed to repair from time to time. So there are certain foods, processed foods particularly, that create inflammation. And I would say, whilst an aggressive fast isn't necessary, it may be possible to do an 18-hour fast from time to time. That involves 1 sleep cycle and 6 hours. But you'll be surprised what a difference something like that could make, where you just drink water for those 18 hours. It allows the gut to heal. It allows this autophagy process to kick in as well, and it removes the glycogen at a faster rate.
And the autophagy process was
the fasting.
The fasting.
Yeah, but
and is that the one that's dealing with the scrap?
Correct.
Cells.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we do more aggressive fasting, but an 18-hour fast is doable in most cases.
Yeah, well, that's not too difficult actually.
No.
You miss your breakfast. Eat early the day before, miss your breakfast. You've done it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Number 3 was the mitochondria, the cell, the battery, the energy. What can we do with natural means to support the sustenance of the energy or the building of the energy?
So, first of all, we need to direct this energy correctly to well-being and not fighting off inflammation. So again, going back to the original thing, detox, reduce the load on the mitochondria. That's one way of getting the energy up, reduce the load on it. The second thing is, we know things like NMN are very good, nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is a supplement. We know things like resveratrol, very good. Anti-inflammatory agents like turmeric and curcumin indirectly help support the mitochondria.
I put fresh turmeric in my sort of made up drink in the morning.
Yes.
And what I do, I actually just I buy fresh turmeric from the supermarket, chop it up in slices, stick it in a bag in the freezer.
Absolutely.
And then just take out a bit in the morning.
Wonderful. Yeah. The other thing that we don't pay too much attention to, but we should, is B12. B12 is involved in the process of making this energy called ATP from the mitochondria. And we sometimes deplete our B12 levels because our gut doesn't absorb it, or we're not taking enough of it because food is no longer nutrition. So supplementing with B12 will support energy levels. And a lot of our patients who take regular B12 supplements find that they are calmer, they have more energy. So again, it's about feeding the cell and the mitochondria correctly. And your predecessors would have got this from nature in the past. Yes. Sadly, we can't, so we have to mitigate against those risks.
Okay. That's brilliant. Number 4 was the immune system. And we spoke about inflammation, which we've not dealt with it, but we've covered it. Gut health, imbalance, leaky gut.
Yes.
What can we do? I mean, I think in the last couple of years, there's been a massive acceleration in information about the gut.
Absolutely.
And how core it is to our well-being.
Yes.
Something I mean, I never even thought about 5 years ago.
No. And
so
yes, and I think the key thing here is to not overcomplicate it. So the gut it's an organ, and we're very good at looking at the organ through CTs and colonoscopies, but it has a function. It effectively is your first line of defense, so it allows certain things in and other things not in. And effectively, everything we eat passes through that gut. So if we eat badly or eat things that are inflammatory, the gut's going to protest. It's going to get swollen, and if it's swollen, it's not going to absorb correctly. But also, there's hundreds of millions of bacteria that live there as an ecosystem. And if we feed some of them and not others, we can get overgrowth. And that overgrowth can then lead to poor gut health and therefore poor gut function. Thirdly, by reducing the immune response of the gut through inflammation, other bugs can grow in there, parasites, bacteria that shouldn't be there. So this is not just about the ecosystem being overgrown, it's about other bugs that shouldn't be there. And these are stealth infections. They're slow.
Yeah.
They won't cause you to be overly ill, but you'll feel fatigue, you may feel bloated, you'll get gut pains. And when we go to the specialists and they can do all the fancy tests to exclude sinister pathology, colitis, cancer, you're kind of left with a dustbin diagnosis of IBS. Now we know that when we do functional gut testing, we can see that there's imbalance, no harmony. So we try and do everything we can to get that harmony back. We also know that antibiotics are overprescribed, and this can sort of cause problems in the gut. And so what we tend to say is, if you can get the functional gut testing done to see where you are, great. If you can't, then focus on a decent pre, pro, and postbiotic that can regulate the bacteria. And remember, stress, trauma, injury, lack of sleep produce inflammation that directly impact on gut health.
Okay, so the food side of that we've touched on, not covered in detail, but we've touched on it. Stress, so presumably if we find ways of dealing with stressful moments better, I don't know, I was going to say not reacting, that may actually make things worse in a way, but if we can find ways to deal with stress,
yes,
which we all face in this world. I mean, it's an angry world we live in as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things around that can make you, then presumably that will have an immediate knock-on effect.
Absolutely.
So stress management, what they call it.
Yes.
Probably not a very good word for it, actually, given what we've said, but that will affect a whole series of things, including the way your gut operates.
100%. And remember, our predecessors had stress. The whole point of life is stress. The ability to overcome challenges of food, water, hunger, etc. has always existed. But what we're doing now is overloading. We're putting more and more on our plates, and therefore the body's having to react quicker and harder. And with that, we're depleting. So our resilience drops. So therefore, all the problems become more amplified. Our ability to, as you said, respond changes to a reactive body, and therefore that agitation it's a vicious circle. We have stress, it leads to lower bandwidth, the lower bandwidth leads to more stress, so that cycle needs to be addressed. And I think we just need to be aware of the impact of what we do, reflect on it, and put in measures to try and mitigate against that risk.
Yeah, brilliant. There's lots of questions I've got, which we'll save for another time. There's one concern I've got, which is a huge number of well-intentioned medical professionals, including you, who think deeply about this and dearly want to give us a better service as human beings. My question is, we have a massive, very powerful pharmacological industry, which I would have to question where they sit in this process, because it seems to me, I mean, if we're well, if we're healthy, there are no drugs. It's over. You only need drugs when you're sick. So what are they doing? What is their intention with all the stuff you've described? Some of which could be quite a threat for them. What is their response? And what are they trying to do for us? What is their plan for us humans?
Yeah. So we now know through hospital admissions, through surveys, research, that we are overprescribing medication. And the impact of that overprescribing sometimes leads to adverse reactions, adverse side effects, increased hospitalization. I think as a profession, we need to think, do we necessarily have to prescribe this drug? Does the patient have other things that can be put into place, or can we support them to understanding why they're getting what the problem or the signal of the disease, and talk about some of the things that we're talking about? Now, we as a medical profession always say, think before you prescribe about alternatives. But in a 10-minute consultation, it's impossible to dissect this in a way that patients can go home and accept it and do something about it. So I think from my point of view, certainly from my experience of the work we've done, is it is inevitably led to reduced prescribing, stopping drugs, or reducing them significantly. What is also important is that we've now empowered the individual to understand their symptoms and do something about it through their own mechanisms of control. And surely that's a good thing, not a bad thing. At a time when hospitals are inundated, GP practices are inundated, my concern is that the data recently has shown that new prescriptions for the same primary indication haven't actually achieved any further benefit. So we're getting more and more sophisticated with the drugs, but we're not actually changing very much. And that is a concern, because when a drug will go through the system, bumbling through, hitting receptors that it may not need to hit, and cause other problems. So surely the starting point should be, what can we achieve for the individual? Now, I'm not saying drugs don't have a role. When someone is sick, they do have a role, but we're not very good at stopping that drug. So it may have been needed in the initial problem, but once that problem has evolved and other mechanisms have been put in place, surely the idea is to reduce that pharmacological intervention and put in more what I call integrative, holistic means of functioning, but all the things we're talking about. So I think the problem I have is that we often see people start a drug and then stay on it, and then another drug is introduced to counteract the side effect of that. And in my work in the cottage hospital, I've seen people on 15, 20 drugs. And the one intervention we put into place that gets them better is stop half of them. Work on movement, work on nutrition. So we as a profession probably need to be more involved in explaining the root cause analysis than jumping straight into the pharmacological world. The issue I have is that the time isn't there. The influence is strong, and with the population screening we're doing now, it's leading to increasing prescribing.
Right. So the conference where one part of the industry was suggesting that they start statins at the age of 16 for life. And I'm not a conspiracist, but it leads me to sort of fear that continual medicating is a sort of a goal, because it's definitely going to cure or stop. Is that something we should be concerned about?
I think we should be mindful. There's been, since people have been talking about this, there's been other publications. One of interest is that over 60-year-olds with raised cholesterols have less heart disease than lower cholesterols. And why, you would ask, why would that be the case when all the evidence is suggesting the contrary? Well, where do you think hormones come from? Your hormones are made from cholesterol. And if we are if this data is correct, and certainly the publications suggest that it might be, then surely the inflammation caused by reducing hormones may be more of a factor than dropping cholesterol. So if we're going to start statins very early in life, what are we doing to the other profiles of that individual? There's also been some studies to suggest that taking statins increases risk of diabetes. So there's all these compounding factors in the background. And I think before we rush into this, we need to take an integrated, holistic approach to the individual. And for me, the data that originally brought statins into play was done on young people. And they found that raised lipids led to more heart disease. But in fact, was it the stress and the inflammation around that individual's life that was more of a factor than the cholesterol? It wasn't done on the older population. So again, what is driving this, we have to be mindful of. And commercial interest is something we also need to be very mindful of.
So statins from the age of 16 for the rest of our lives may not be a great thing.
I would say at the moment, looking at what else is going on in that individual's life, we should probably be spending more emphasis on that rather than putting in the last of last on one element.
Yeah, great. Well, okay, so here's my final question, which is, I hope I've been fairly diligently following the advice from you over the last 5 years, Ash. So given that, how long do you think I've got?
Yeah. Well, I mean, judging by what's going on in recent research, if we could continue to feed your cell effectively, and now through peptides feed the DNA properly, data suggests that you will be living till 120.
You could be my best friend.
And living well. Or dying younger later.
Yes, definitely. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you want to hear more, please do follow us. Hit the bell icon so you're notified of other podcasts when they come out. And subscribe to our channel. And I look forward to welcoming you.